Well, candidates are changing the way they communicate. Instead of getting flyers in your mailbox, voters are getting text messages. KAKE's Jocelyn Schifferdecker is here now with more.
Yeah, Deb, political science experts say the more traditional ways of campaigning with TV spots or on the radio just aren't working anymore. They're too expensive and don't reach a large demographic, but messaging meets the voter where they are.
A day, probably 2 to 3. I stopped counting at about a dozen messages.
Voter Gordon Basham is tired of his phone being spammed with messages from political campaigns, especially because he says more than half of them come from one candidate, and he's asked the messages to stop.
When there's an option in the text message to reply with stop to keep from getting future messages, and that doesn't work, that's disrespectful. They change phone numbers and they just keep coming.
Wichita State political science professor Dr. Neil Allen says campaigns struggle with figuring out a way to reach voters.
Because the traditional ways of advertising on television and over-the-air radio really don't reach a good chunk of the electorate anymore.
So they meet voters where they are, their cell phone. He says this not only reaches more people, but it's also cheaper.
Text messages and emails are nearly free once you have a list. It could be that your number is actually on several lists.
Dr. Allen explains Kansas has an open voter file, which means campaigns can see if you voted in past elections. That's how your number ends up on the list and why you get messages. He says while some might find it annoying, political speech is important.
Political speech should be protected and is of value. Filtering out messages that you're not interested in about politics is the job of a citizen.
Dr. Allen also says the laws that protect against spam messaging have exemptions for political speech. He says if you don't like getting the messages, you can choose to not vote for that candidate. In studio, Jocelyn Schifferdecker, KAKE News on your side.